Sometimes the paranormal gets a little too close for comfort and displays the ability to cross the boundaries and impact on our realm. These stories are from people who have experienced the real physical effects of the paranormal, and it shook them deeply. Spirit Slap, Weirton, West Virginia, USA, 2016. Kelly was going through a very hard period in her life when this incident happened to her, and on this occasion she was awake in bed next to her partner, who was sleeping. Due to the difficult times she was going through, she was wide awake and very upset. There were a myriad of complex issues happening, and Kelly was feeling so overwhelmed. She was sitting up crying and contemplating taking her own life. Things had gotten so bad for her that Kelly had even gone so far as to plan how and when she was going to do it. As she cried in that bed, trying not to wake her partner, she could feel as if the whole world had collapsed all around her, and she was totally lost. Her thoughts turned to the trouble she had faced, the people that had hurt her, and throughout all these thoughts, she recalled her girlfriend's best friend Tanya, that had died of cancer 3 months prior. Kelly had never met her, but had only ever seen her in pictures of them around the house and in albums. In the darkness of that night, and in the darkness of her thoughts, Kelly gazed, teary-eyed and helpless, into the room, when suddenly something appeared in the room right in front of her. It was Tanya that appeared in the room. She floated above the bed in which Kelly sat, and Kelly couldn't believe her blurry eyes as she wiped away her tears to get a better look. The image of Tanya that appeared was colourless and white. She looked as if she was floating in water, so much so that her hair appeared to be floating as well as it moved about. The worst thing was, apart from this apparition of the dead just suddenly appearing in front of her, Tanya looked very angry. Then, without warning, this image of Tanya moved slightly closer to the shocked Kelly, and slapped Kelly's face, left to right, and Kelly felt the pain.
Ow.
She couldn't believe what was happening, and had to second guess herself. Was she dreaming? Was she imagining this? She looked back up, and Ghost Tanya was still there. There was no doubt it was real, because she could still feel the sting of the slaps on her face. The image of Tanya reprimanded her. It screamed at her something along the lines of, "How dare you want to kill yourself, when I would do anything to be there with my friend again? Don't you ever think of suicide again. Live your life to the fullest." And then, just like that, she was gone. Now imagine Kelly sitting there in the dark after that encounter. Here she was. Her eyes were red, and her face was all wet from crying, and holding her cheeks, which were still sore from the slap, wondering just what the heck had happened. Nothing else happened that night, and the quiet, still silence and darkness of the night remained in that room with her. So after a while, she just fell asleep. A few days later, she had the courage to tell her partner the story. She laughed and said, "Oh yes, that would be her slapping some sense into you, so that I wouldn't be sadder from your loss. She was a protective one." Kelly was shocked and took some time to contemplate it all. From that day forward, Kelly has often thought about this event, and 2 thoughts have always stayed in her mind. First, it serves her as a very real reminder to keep happy, and secondly, to this day she questions how the ghost of Tanya was able to read her thoughts. I guess we'll never know. I love hearing your true creepy stories. I think we all love the creepy and the strange, and that's why we're here. Ghosts, demons, UFOs, aliens, cryptids, urban legends and more. If it's creepy and weird, it has a home here. Leave Me Alone. Cabramatta, New South Wales, Australia, circa 1982. Jessica lived with her parents and sister at this property and was about 8 or 9 years old when she had this experience. There had never really been anything strange that happened to her prior to this, but this would be the beginning of a lifetime of strange events for her. It was early one morning that she was in bed and suddenly woke up. She wasn't sure why she had woken up, but soon found that she needed to use the toilet. As she struggled out of bed and started to make her way towards her bedroom door, she could hear a strange noise coming from somewhere outside of her room. She stopped and paused for a second to try and hear it better. That noise was still coming from outside of her room. She wasn't sure what it was, and she wasn't sure if she should go out or not, but she really needed to go to the toilet now. She opened her door and soon realized that it sounded like a man sobbing. Confused and a little bit cautious, she slowly made her way up the corridor towards the toilet, trying not to make any noise. As she happened to be walking up the corridor, she realized that the sobbing noise appeared to be coming from her parents' room. As she crept up the corridor slowly, 100 thoughts went through her head. She was hoping not to make any noise, but at the same time, she wondered if someone was hurt or sick, or if something more terrible had happened that even an 8-year-old couldn't comprehend. She snuck up to her parents' room, and through the half-open bedroom door, she could see her parents in bed. Her father was lying in bed with his eyes closed, but he was having some sort of dream or nightmare in which he clearly looked distressed and worried. Jessica also noticed that her mother was awake and that she was sitting up in the bed next to her husband. Her mother looked like she was in shock and didn't know what to do as she looked down at him. Jessica didn't want to be noticed, but was curious as to what was going on, so quietly she stayed to watch what was happening in the room. As her father tossed and turned in his bed, he was sobbing and mumbling in his fitful sleep. She could make out what he was saying to someone or something. "No, go away, leave me alone." Curiously, she looked around the room and could see no one else in there with them. It was just Mum and Dad. Jessica was worried for her father, but again, didn't want her mother to know that she was out of bed. As she watched her father toss and turn in bed, there was a pause. And then suddenly, as she watched, it looked like something she couldn't see, grabbed a hold of the bedsheet and dragged it off the bed. Jessica's mother jumped startled, as Jessica did too, and she gasped in fear and shock. Her mother suddenly looked up and saw her. Jessica ran away from the bedroom door in fear and straight to the toilet to hide. It took Jessica a long time to come to grips with what she had seen, and had trouble sleeping for a very long time after that. Scratched by the Dark. Cabramatta, New South Wales, Australia, circa 1993. Emilia was a young adult who was dating a young man named Jacob, and they would often hang out together on weekends. She lived with her father and always helped around the house, so her father had confidence in her to look after the place when he had to go away on a work trip for a few days. He left her in charge of the house, and Emilia took the opportunity to have her boyfriend stay with her. That afternoon, he came over, and after they had dinner and a drink or two, as the night went on, they decided they would get some sleep. That night would be burned into her memory, and for all the wrong reasons. She was restless getting to sleep, but when Emilia did finally sleep, she had the most terrifying dream. This was her dream. She dreamed that she was in bed, and she could feel a disturbing presence in the room. It felt as if the darkness was falling all around her when she looked up to see what was going on, and she saw the most terrifying sight at the foot of the bed. It was a horrifying figure of a demon. She could see it clearly in all its terrible foulness as it stood there, red-skinned and growling at her, with jagged, pointed teeth and an abnormally large mouth. She could also see its long, sharp claws and was terrified. It started to move slightly towards her, and in a panic, she tried in vain to move away from it across the bed. The demon moved closer. Its strange legs bent slightly as it began to put its arms on the bed where she was. It was poised as if it was ready to pounce on her in an attack. In her dream, Emilia tried to get away from the demon's sharp claws, but the demon lashed out and slashed at her while making a deep and disturbing growling noise. It missed a few times, but one agonizing slash made contact, and Emilia screamed as she felt the sharp sting of its claws slash the side of her ribs. In a panic, Emilia looked down to see that not only had she been scratched by it, but she could see her whole body ripped open, and she could see her insides that were starting to spill out onto the bed. In that moment in her dream, she took a huge gasp of breath, and she suddenly woke up. Terrified, covered in sweat and breathing heavily from her nightmare, she sat up in bed. Jacob was now awake too and asked her what was wrong. She explained that she'd had a terrifying dream, and after they spoke a bit and she had calmed down, she eventually fell back asleep. Later that morning, Emilia awoke to the daylight and got out of bed. She made her way to the bathroom, recalling the horrible dream she'd had, and she shuddered. As she was getting ready in the bathroom, she lifted up her shirt where she had dreamed of the scratch, and to her utter terror, noticed 3 scratch marks on her side. Terrified, she screamed, and Jacob, on hearing the commotion, ran up to her to see what had happened. Now, Emilia was left with these terrifying questions of whether it was just a dream or if there was something else going on. The question has never been answered. This show is made possible by people like you sharing their real-life experiences, so please feel free to contact me. Thanks for joining me on this creepy adventure. Until next time.